Good morning, everyone. I'm going to open up the meeting that's called Municipal Services Environmental Sustainability Committee. On board today, I have Council Member, actually Vice Chair Jim Posh.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And also we are honored with the presence of Public Works Director Clinkscale. I would like, if the both of you are okay with it, to drop our titles today. Make this a work session that allows us to use first names and be more informal. So I originally sent this list that's on the agenda to Director Clinkscale so that she could have it as a reference. So I'm pretty much going to give the floor to you as we go through the items. And so start with the refuse bin program and how it's going.
Okay, your question to me was my expectations at the beginning of the program and my comments and concerns regarding the program today.
Yep.
So at the onset of deciding to pursue automation, we had a rate. I'm going to pause for a minute.
I would also like, I neglected to say that Councilor Vice President Davida Russell was unavailable this morning, so she is not here. Thank you.
So when we decided to pursue automation, we had a refuse and recycling task force. And you may remember, both of you may remember, because there was a lot of public notification about it. It went on for probably about 6 months, where we had members from the community. We had folks come in that had recently switched to automation. We had the solid waste district come in to give the city the pros and cons. And we also had a company come in that did this across the state, and we had a rate study and a route optimization study done, okay? And as a result of the study, we determined what our rates would be, and as you may recall, council implemented a 10-year rate schedule. And we also reconfigured our routes, and we reduced the route with the expectation that our efficiency would go up, and our with the cart system, that we would have a reduction in some garbage and an increase in recycling, because we were really, really emphasizing recycling at this time. And we did a lot of education, and we were really hoping that with the increase in recycling, that further allowed us to reduce the routes. But that was my expectation. What happened was, although our recycling did increase, really, our recycling really did increase. In some areas of the city, it really didn't increase, and we had more garbage than we had anticipated. As a result of the study, everyone would get one trash cart, everyone would get one recycling cart. There was a member on our committee that said, well, in the Jewish neighborhood, we have more children, so could we have an additional cart? So then we folded that into the program that folks could get one additional cart. But as time went on, that did not accommodate some people based on feedback. Some folks needed more than 2 carts.
Oh.
Or they requested more than 2 carts.
Okay.
Okay. And that was not anticipated. Also, one of the things that we had decided to do, and we had it in all of our communication that we had out to the community, that we would only be servicing Cleveland Heights carts. So in most places, folks just got rid of, if they had a cart, with the wheels, they just got rid of it, or they just use it as an extra cart to transfer garbage into the recycling cart. Well, in some areas where folks needed an additional cart, they would still put out that cart that did not belong to the city, that was not a city cart. And so we stopped picking those carts up, and then it just became a huge controversy that, well, we don't have enough carts. But our rate schedule was based on 2 carts, 2 garbage carts, 1 recycling cart. So as a result of that, looking back on it, we're probably going to need an additional route study because our
What was that study called?
it was a route optimization and rate analysis study.
Okay, thank you.
Because our refuse truck operators in some cases are staying out late
Yeah.
because, I mean, they just can't get all the garbage up in an 8-hour day on some of the routes. And we still have it hanging out there that some folks want a 3rd cart. Some have even requested a 4th cart. But I really feel that if people recycled, that even if you have a large family, 3 carts should accommodate you. But then we have the issue of the fairness of it. You know, some people feel, some of our residents feel that, well, I don't produce that much garbage. Why am I paying what everybody else pays? And then folks that do produce a lot of garbage feel that they should pay what everybody else pays. So there's not the equity in folks paying for the amount of garbage that they put out. We have some folks in our neighborhood that recycle almost everything. You know, they put out very little garbage, you know. And we took that into consideration because we did, as part of our study, we do have smaller carts for some folks in condominium associations and stuff. They got smaller carts. So we need to look at it to, number one, to determine what our rate schedule is going to be if we allow folks to put out more trash, if we're going to implement another cart, and also to redo our routes so we don't have our collectors out at 5 or 5:30.
Is that the rerouting, is that also, could that be determined by that study that you mentioned?
Yeah, we just would have a route study where they would look at how much time it takes us to do a route.
Do you need any funding for doing that kind of
Yeah,
analysis?
that's going to cost, you know, we would have to look at the cost of it.
Okay, so will you be looking at that for your projections for the budget for 2026? Okay.
Yes, I will. And another thing that we did, you know, we had capital folks on staff at that time. And, you know, looking back at it, we purchased just enough carts for our program. I mean, we purchased just enough trucks for our program. We did not purchase like an additional truck to have when the truck went out of service. So now if a truck goes out of service, we have to put a rear loader out. We'd have to have 2 folks that are manually picking up trash. Our trucks, of course, are getting older. And in hindsight, I would have ordered an additional truck.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, this is real helpful, and I think it's good that, you know, we start looking at how to make this better, you know, hopefully in the next budget cycle. Some of these things, see them included in the budget cycle. Do you actually have any kind of evidence or data that compares volumes of garbage? I mean, you don't necessarily weigh it, but I would assume you have some kind of metrics that maybe we can compare what the garbage collection was before versus now, just to get a sense of, I mean, one of the things that I've heard, I don't know if I've heard it directly from you, but there's a lot more garbage, or there's a lot more large item pickups. It would be helpful to have an idea of how much.
I'll have to, yeah, there's a way that we can determine that. I just have to think about, you know, where we get those statistics from.
Because I assume when it goes to the dump, the truck is getting weighed.
Yes, it is.
And you're paying based on
Tonnage.
I think it would be helpful to understand what tonnage is, especially if we're working on justifying another truck. And also, when you do these, you bring experts in, sometimes they're not necessarily from the city, or they know how we do things here. You may get some wrong data, or some, maybe the routes that were initially calculated just were, I don't want to say a bad output, but maybe they just need to be refreshed, as you're saying.
Yeah, I think they just need to be refreshed. I believe the company that we used also may have did the study in Lakewood, which is kind of similar in size. But I'll have to check, but some reason Lakewood is coming.
There- Following up on your question about data, would you be looking, it would be nice to have a comparison. So would we go back to the original data that you had for tonnage, or even just last year? If we're looking for, did it increase or not? Which makes more sense? To go all the way back to the beginning of the program, or maybe just in the last couple of years?
We'll probably look at it at different points of time.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Also, on your list, you talk about like yard waste and bulk pickup.
Yes.
So one of the issues that we had, it's not as prevalent now, but we still have the problem with folks getting evicted and just putting a bunch of trash on the tree lawn, because we don't do move outs, we don't do, evictions. And we find that to be a problem with some landlords that don't actually live in the house. They may have a tenant evicted, and then you have a tree lawn full of trash.
For a long time.
And it's there until they receive a citation. They give the owner an opportunity to get it up. And we've done a lot more outreach in my department, in my office. Whereas if we see a lot of trash out as a result of a move out, we try to locate that owner and give them a courtesy call. And in some cases, they do respond. But, if you have a tenant that moves out in the middle of the night, or one that's evicted and the landlord lives out of town, there's a lot of garbage in cases like that. But it used to be a lot more prevalent than it is today, but it's still very prevalent.
Yeah.
That we have that issue, which is where the bulk truck comes in. So not only are they doing their regular route, then they may have to reroute to pick up those types of complaints.
Is the property owner charged for that?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
So, do we have the right legislation? So maybe we can act faster on some of this. So instead of giving the landlord, and I don't know what it is, 3 weeks or 2 weeks, or waiting to the bulk, if we see something has gone out, we just do it and we charge the landlord. Similar, I would think, to, cutting the grass of somebody's house that's not grass.
I think that right now it's a combination of equipment and maybe staffing, because we have a truck out on a regular bulk route, so that throws us behind on a bulk route when we have to go back and pick those large items up.
Yeah.
But we could, we have kind of worked out a system with our housing department, where we will actually go out and we'll take the photo for them and submit the photo to them, and we'll try to pick it up when we get a lot of complaints about something. That's not the regular process, but we will do that because we'll have a photo of what we actually picked up, and we'll also submit a invoice to the housing department, and the housing department will actually send out the invoice.
Okay.
The issue with that, though, is that if the person doesn't pay the invoice, then it's put on their property taxes, then we don't get until the following year.
Right, right.
But we'll eventually get the money.
We'll eventually get it. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you hear from residents is, why do people have to complain about something? Why can't we be more proactive to see that there's a problem? Why are we waiting? Someone to submit a complaint in order to solve it. And I know the systems that you, and I'm sort of breaching the line of being a legislative body versus the operational administrative side of City Hall. But this is feedback that we get, and it is like, don't wait for someone to report a pothole. If we know that a pothole is someplace, find a way to get it on a list.
Well, pothole is different from the garbage.
I know it's very different.
Okay, yeah, because we do that with potholes. We don't wait for somebody to complain about a pothole. We'll send a pothole that we come across. I will send a pothole that I come across. We'll send it and it'll get right on the list. Because that is my responsibility, to make sure the potholes are taken care of. It's my responsibility to make sure the garbage is picked up. But, we have rules and systems in place, and there's a fine line that, I try to walk, because what happens is if you have a rule in place that, okay, we're not going to pick up trash outside the garbage, but then folks see us picking up trash outside the garbage, then
Precedent.
yeah, then it doesn't become a rule anymore. And that's kind of what happened with the additional carts. We put a substitute driver on a route. That driver was emptying carts that were not city carts. And then when we found out about it and stopped picking up those carts, then everybody started complaining about it. But that was the rule at the beginning, that we would have no non-city carts. So the fine line is, if we're going to make a rule or regulation to try to stick to it, other than that, we shouldn't even do it, because folks will just say, well, you picked up my bags last week, why are you not going to pick them up this week out the cart?
So as being one of the newer council members here, I mean, do these rules and regulations in your department also wake back to what we have in our negotiated agreements? So if do we have things like in the negotiated agreement that, okay, well, we have a certain garbage collector that cannot pick up a bag, it's got to be in the bin, or any of these things that we're talking about, like if a substitute is taking a non-city bin, is any of that written into, I guess, our contract? Labor.
They're not in the labor contracts, but I don't really feel there's a necessity to be in the labor contract. I think it's more of a training issue in my department.
Oh, I get it.
I mean, when you have a number of people, when you have 2 or 3 people out on FMLA or workers' comp, and then you get a new employee and you're just trying to get the garbage up on time, you may give them the sheet and say, or give them the tablet and say, this is your route, do X, Y, and Z, and we're just trying to get the garbage picked up.
Right.
And we do have cases like that. We have, just one day something will happen and now you have an employee on FMLA, an employee out on workers' compensation. You're scrambling to get employees where they need to be. You have a truck that goes down. And so the supervisor's goal is to just try to get the garbage up on the scheduled date. And so sometimes those things slip through the crack, but we are trying to get our staffing up. One of the issues that we've had is we require our staff to have CDL licenses. And sometimes people don't come to the table with that CDL license. So we have an in-house training program that we've been administering for the last year or so. But that takes time. That could be 6 months before you get a driver. We prefer to have one coming to the table with a CDL license. And that is in the labor agreement. But it's just difficult to find those employees. But now, with the rate increase, the wage increase, I'm anticipating we may have more experienced and qualified folks.
What about drug testing when you're trying to do applicants?
We do that. That's standard.
And if they fail a marijuana test, are they allowed to work?
No, there's a process in-house. If they fail a marijuana test, then there's a Department of Transportation process that they have to go through. They cannot drive. They have to have, they have to go through a program with the Department of Transportation before they have to be clear to come back to work to drive.
Is that our regulation, or is that a regulation that's
State.
That's a CDL regulation. That's a Department of Transportation regulation. That's any driver, you know, whether they're with the city or if they're hauling privately. If they get stopped for drugs, then that's a process that they have to go.
I'm under the impression that some cities, maybe they don't require a CDL license.
There are some vehicles that you must have a CDL license to drive.
I would like to know, thinking only in the silo of refuse pickup right now, if you're considering asking for another truck,
I am.
okay? And it sounds like you're ramping up staffing or trying to get just hired for what you have approved right now. Will you also be looking for adding some staff in 26?
Maybe a couple people.
Okay, okay. Are there any other trucks that you would need? How is the claw working, the bulk pickup
Yeah,
truck?
I would probably be requesting an additional front end loader, which is the automated truck,
Okay,
a lightning loader, which is a claw truck,
okay,
and possibly an additional rear packer, which is the truck that we use to pick up yard waste.
okay. What does that one, how is that mechanically? I don't watch when people come down my street to pick
You
up the
see
bags.
folks, like, if you ever see like an employee on the back of a truck,
Huh?
that's usually a rear packer. So
Okay,
where you can see in the rear, that's where they're tossing the trash in the rear of the truck.
The bag. Up the bags and throwing them in.
But an issue that we had with yard waste, is, again, as I said, it went back to equipment. When a front loader went down and then you had to use the refuse truck in order to pick up regular garbage, then you didn't have that truck available to pick up yard waste.
yep.
So back on this truck, and this is sort of gluing together multiple conversations we've had over the last couple weeks. So you had a truck that caught fire,
Yes,
and that is still
it's still in Michigan.
For how much longer?
They said we should be getting it back in September. They're waiting for a part. And, you know, with the tariffs and everything, that has impacted our operation because some parts it's taking longer for folks that do that work, manufacturers that do that work to get those parts in. And we actually had that truck towed to Michigan. I want to say it was back in February or March, and it's still there. They're waiting on one additional part. So they've given us an ETA of September.
we're down one truck right now.
We're totally down one truck that, when we have trucks that go up and down every day, but that's a truck that's just totally out of service that we can't count on.
And and from what we heard earlier today, the number of trucks that purchased just the bare minimum number of trucks.
Right, but you know, since then, we did get a truck this year because we received some funding from the, we received a Recycling Ohio grant from the EPA. And we actually did get another truck, but it's slated for recycling. And but we do have that truck, and it came maybe about a month ago. Maybe about a month ago we received it, but it's designated for recycling, so that has helped. But this is a case, and we may have to deal with this when we have a new budget. That truck that we just received, we actually ordered it like 2 years ago. We had to get an extension on the grant because we didn't have the truck.
Yeah.
The truck wasn't ready.
Why did it take so long? Was that on us, or was it on just?
No, we ordered the truck 2 years ago. It was based on the manufacturer. You know, they have so many trucks, and they got us the truck as soon as they could get it.
The same issue that we have with ordering a fire truck. It just can't
Probably.
be, you can't walk out on a lot and just say, I'll take that red one over there, so.
That's one of the reasons that we do. I'm going to be submitting some legislation for a vehicle that we did find on the lot. If you guys recall, a couple months ago, I had identified a vehicle that we could use for our brine and our new hot box,
Right.
and they sold it. Well, we've identified another truck,
Great.
and that I hope about the same cost, but I think it has maybe. has a little more power than that truck. So it would cost more, but I think we can get it for the same price.
And the hot box is the pothole filling.
Right, and it is out, we're just using a different truck to tow it on that we're moving stuff around. It is out.
Lots of moving parts in that garage. I would like to move on to the discussion about recycling services for businesses and apartment buildings, because we're talking just about being able to maintain the services for what we are doing right now. And if we did add recycling for the businesses and apartment houses, that would require some more equipment and staffing. So where are you at in terms of thinking about that? And did they get the pilot program for the recycling that we were going to set up some locations for business
Yeah,
recycling?
that was actually initiated by sustainability and that pilot project. It hasn't been 100% implemented, but we just got the dumpsters and stuff. And we're placing the dumpsters to see how that goes.
Okay,
See how that pilot program goes. And if I do have an additional route optimization study done, then I will include maybe for recycling, whether or not we are able to do businesses, and there should be a charge for that.
and could you also include in that study, for the record, Mayor Sarin has just entered the room. Good morning. Composting food waste, or is that asking too much of that kind of to study? Because composting food waste is becoming another way to reduce garbage to the landfills.
Yeah, that's a pilot program that's also going on through our sustainability department. And we just identified a company that's going to do that during the pilot.
Great.
We'll see how that goes.
Okay. Do you have the locations for the pilot program for recycling for businesses, where the bins are going to go, the dumpsters?
I don't have that right in front of me,
Okay,
but they have identified a couple of places where those bins are going to go, and a couple of the business districts.
so they'll be targeting the business districts.
So these are bins that look like the residential bins, or are they more commercial based?
Well, the recycling pilot program that we're having for the businesses, they're dumpsters, so they're like commercial. But for the composting, it's a cart similar to the cart that we use, pickup cart.
Mayor, did you wish to contribute anything yet this morning?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I just texted to see if Dr. Boateng could come up and
right there.
provide. Sir, we are talking about both the recycling and the composting programs right now. And so I thought that if you had any insight that you wanted to provide to the committee, that might be useful. So do you have a moment?
Sure.
Please sit.
Okay. Sure.
I'll grab it.
All right. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So like Director Clinskill mentioned, regarding the business recycling, we have some locations. We've already made some contacts with some of the businesses. And so the idea is to spread the locations around the business districts, covering the entire space of the city, because we didn't want to just be focused on one area. Also, I know we talked about the bins, right? We have the bins for those locations. We also have the material, recycling material that will be considered for this particular pilot. And so now we are just putting the signage on those bins because that's very important to ensure that we can run a very good pilot and not have materials that are not supposed to be in there, put in there, which usually is the challenge for most recycling, especially in the business districts.
Which materials have you targeted for the recycling?
Paper and cardboard.
Okay.
Then the idea is that as we, sorry, I'm catching my breath a little bit running here. The idea is that, as we move to implement this on a full, broader scale, having gotten all the insights from the pilot, we can begin to expand the materials that we're looking at. And we just want to be very compatible with what the solid waste district has, within its recyclable material portfolio, if you will. And then briefly, the update regarding the composting, right? So we have made an initial contact with Dave's to be a site host. So together with our selected consultant for the pilot, Rust Belt Riders, we have made some, materials regarding site host and proposed locations and all of that. I think what needs to be fleshed out, and I was just talking with the planning director on this as well. What needs to be fleshed out now is the footprint of where exactly it will be and how it impacts Dave's operations. I think that's something that needs to be fleshed out because we rightly understand that Dave's is, being very helpful and supportive of this program by, agreeing to be a site host. That's number one. But we also want to make sure that it doesn't impact their business and their operations in any way. So
It's kind of tricky, isn't it? Because you're also looking at being convenient so that people throughout the city can take advantage of those locations. So it becomes a walking that fine line again.
yes, exactly. And briefly, there are also some benefits that we project it'll bring to Dave's as well, because there's going to be a lot of traffic there.
Yeah.
Bringing people in. Dave's employees will also participate in the program.
Yeah.
Signage information, dissemination of all the details regarding the composting program will also be provided by Dave's. And so there's going to be a lot of benefits, and there are some things in there often regarding highlighting businesses that support the city's work when it comes to sustainability and all of that. So it's going to be a win-win for both parties.
Yes, agreed.
Is this the Severance location for Dave's or the Lee Road?
The Severance location. Yes.
You could go to the grocery store and dump your compost off. Pretty good.
One additional point that I wanted to make is that obviously the goal of a pilot, you hope, is to gain lessons and understanding that allow you to bring that program to scale. And we're talking about the recycling services, the potential for expanding the composting as well. And these are all additional, previously unavailable services that the city would be providing, especially once we bring them to scale. And I know that you had some discussion earlier in the meeting that I wasn't present for about the refuse bins and how we're rolling that out in an ongoing way. I'm assuming that we're continuing the discussion about how we allow for households that are producing more garbage to make use. And this is one of our two enterprise funds. These are the only two funds, the refuse and recycling and our sewer utility are the only two business-like activities that we have in our financial system. And so these are the two that we have to make sure that we are accounting for the revenues meeting the expenditures to the degree that we can.
And you'll have a lot of data as well then.
Exactly. And the goal then is to make sure that these funds are self-sustained. That's always the goal, and that's what we're striving for. And that's why we need to take another look at how we collect, how many bins any particular property is allowed to have, and what the requirements are in order to fund the services that we're providing. And it's no different when we're adding services like the commercial business recycling or the, certainly the scaled version of any composting program. And so I want to make sure that along with this discussion is a discussion about sustainable funding for these, because we do want these things. We want to experience the benefit of the environmental benefits. We hope that we can achieve some economic benefits as well by removing things from the garbage stream. But we have to make sure that the way that we're doing it moving forward allows for that financial sustainability.
If you can reduce tipping fees, that makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, and we should take that into account as we're thinking about the cost of the total system. because it does have an impact there. But we also find sometimes when you add these sorts of things, there is a mitigation factor in terms of the cost, but it doesn't account for all of the costs of the additional services. And so that might require some tough decisions about, how we ask residents to fund this additional service.
So one of the things we've talked about in our finance committee is having more P&L statements, profit and loss statements. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid to, we're collecting garbage and we're getting fees for that. We shouldn't be afraid to make a profit on some of this kind of stuff because it pays for things like trucks. And even a real balance sheet that amortizes the trucks. So you're really able to see, hey, look, it's all built into the costs. Very similar to some of our questions we've had about Kane Park. Similar, and this is obviously not part of the conversation, but having a detailed P&L for all these sub businesses, and something that as a council person I feel like we're missing many times. It's good that you're bringing this up, but it's something we need to do from a financial perspective.
I think the councilman makes a good point, and that I did want to make the clear differentiation between some of our services, like we've got a youth baseball program, for instance, and we don't expect that the fees for the youth baseball program pay for the youth baseball program in its entirety, especially given the amount of maintenance on fields and in the parks generally that they use for those sorts of things. We're not because those aren't business-like activities according to how we do our finances. And it's the same with the Kane Park operations, the performance-based operations. There are a lot of people call them subsidy. It's not really subsidy. The subsidy is actually the subsidy that we are providing from the ticket sales into the process. But I think that it does make a lot of sense for us to have a better understanding over time of what investment we are making in certain activities so that we can look in a more holistic way at all of those activities. Holistically, but also is specifically looking, like you brought up Kane Park here, looking at what does it cost to run a season. In a business-like activity, all of the capital costs, all of the investment that the city would be making would have to be included in that. We would have to take out debt, and then the debt service would be funded through the ticket sales, merch sales, whatever, maybe. Now, we don't do that here with Kane Park. Obviously, the city could make a choice to make Kane Park operations a business-like activity if it wanted to. I would advise against that in the future. If you guys went down that road, I think it would be problematic from an audit standpoint. But in this case, when it comes to the refuse and recycling collection, that is already a business-like activity. It is already classed as an enterprise fund. And this could be sort of the way that we make sure, and we do that with our audited statements. They're classed that way, they're reported that way, so we can take a look at those when it comes to those enterprise funds. And that would be good practice for us to have sort of a less formal look. So it wouldn't be in the sense that we would be audited in this way, because we don't want to audit non-enterprise funds as though they are enterprise funds. But moving forward, I think that we should do more of that when it comes to the enterprise funds and expand those lessons into the other services that we provide.
I think the updated audit or updated study that we were talking about earlier will be very helpful now that we're looking at rates and if they're actually providing what we need in terms of income for the city to provide the services that people are requesting more bins, where are we at? And if we have that information through the study, then we can say, this is what we allow for a resident. You have the data that you can substantiate.
We did start, we started that when we began the refuse and
Yes, I
with the
remember.
task force back in the day.
Yeah.
And I think there was some compromise made at the time for those, because we were only supposed to get one bin each household. And then there was a compromise made for those households that produce more garbage, that we would provide an additional bin, and that was factored into the cost.
Share that.
Okay, and so now we would do an additional study to see if, what the cost and what the requirements would be for additional bins. Yeah.
I think when we look at this from a financial modeling perspective, you know, planning for 2 bins for every household is certainly overkill citywide. And it's much more generous than having 1 bin. But I think we're going to have to draw a line when it comes to its 3rd bin. I mean, there's a cost for that. And maybe I think there has to be a cost for that. And
There's a cost.
And I just want to go on records. I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree when it comes to a financial statement, or King Park. It's really off topic, but I just.
We're not in disagreement here. I think the only distinction that I wanted to make was the technical, actual financial statement, differentiation between what we class as enterprise funds or business-like activities versus those activities that are core municipal services in a different sense. So Kane Park, our, baseball or, the whatever other services that we provide, those things are the pool, for instance. Yeah, the pool does not pay for itself. It can't possibly. The prices that we would have to charge in order for Cumberland to pay for itself, including all of the capital expense, would be astronomical. And we would never expect that, we would do that. And I think we're in a similar spot with Kane Park and Evans and the Alma, as a result of their historic importance in our community. Cumberland is the same way. It's a gem. Evans is a gem, and investing in it over time is important. I think that it is important to see the all-inclusive costs and see the all-inclusive revenues that are specific to the activity. And that's where I think that we're in more alignment than people might think. But I think that thinking about it as a profit and loss is a good way to think about it, but it will, unless you take out that other context, it will ignore some important factors. And that one important factor is sort of the shorthand is that it's not an enterprise fund. It's not a business-like activity. And we need to recognize that as we are looking at the all-inclusive costs and all-inclusive revenues.
Okay, I'm going to move on with my agenda. Thank you so much for coming up. Appreciate that. Is there a status on the transfer station?
The transfer station, maybe about a month ago, we met the engineer that had done the original specifications for the transfer station, because we wanted to update those specs, and we also wanted to include an upgrade to the office up there. We have an office at the top of the transfer station that's really old, that's not very well ventilated, and we wanted to update the technology so they're not doing as much manual work, so we included that in the specs. So right now, the engineering firm is updating those specifications, and we're going to go out to bid for that.
Are you looking at a quantity of funding for that?
Well, I had requested additional funding for that, and we'll see what the new estimate is.
I think it was somewhere in the lines last year of 800,000.
It was like 885 or something like that, and we asked for $1 million.
Yeah.
The specs that the engineering firm does, they're generally able to give you an idea of how much.
They'll give us an estimate. They haven't given me the updated estimate yet, so when they do, we'll have a better idea.
So realistically, this is work that'll actually get next year, I would.
Realistically, yes. But we'll be bidding it this year.
How are we, how's the station holding out? I mean,
Yeah,
It's
day by day.
best as it can hold
Yeah.
out.
All right. I would like to on my agenda, I talked about potential sidewalk repair program. I don't want to get into the details of that right now, but I'm just giving you a heads up that I'm going to probably ask for that in the budget. Thank you. In the budget, as a consideration, at least, we talked about that a few years back.
Right.
And so I just want your opinion on that, Director Klingscale, because it's really important to me that we try to answer the concerns that people have about how badly we have sidewalks, throughout the city, and also the impact of those sidewalks panels that are being pushed up by the trees that are on tree lawns. So I just wanted to let you know I'm hoping to work with you on possibly doing a program like that.
Okay, as you recall, we spoke a little bit about how Shaker's program.
Yes, yes.
And the way the Shaker's program runs, I think that it requires that, of course, that there's an inspector from the housing department that does the initial citation.
Yep.
And then an inspector from Public Works that does the final sign off on the work. But in between there, what they do is they actually hire a contractor and, they bid a contract out for that. And the way that it works from our last discussion of the topic is that city staff does not actually do the work. They bid out a contract. A resident if they receive a citation, they're giving X number of days to make the repair. If they don't make the repair, then the city makes a repair through that contractor, and then they bill that resident for it. So that's how the Shaker program.
Does that make sense to you for our city?
Well, I think we would have to evaluate it. We would need more staff. I
Yep.
don't know how it would impact housing because it would require housing to
Yep.
get involved. And we would need to have the funding for the contract that does the work. That would probably eventually come back to the city.
Yeah.
It's just that, if they don't pay, it's the same cycle. They certify the property tax.
We also talked about targeting an area, not doing it citywide, because it makes more sense to target areas like we do with some of our other programs and not tackle them all at once, so that those citations in that targeted area could be addressed, so.
And I think that you spoke of before, if there would be maybe some funding available for folks that couldn't afford to do it.
Yes,
And that would be a separate program. I don't know if that would be administered through planning or what have you.
Yeah.
Community development. I'm just saying it's not a cost that we have in the budget right now.
yeah.
We don't have the capacity to do it, and it would be something that we would contract.
Go ahead.
Well, I've seen this done in other cities, and I believe it's been something that ends up on their property tax, where there's some walkthrough or some inspection that gets done and is determined. I believe legislation is passed that gives the city the authority to do X amount of sidewalks. And I don't know the funding mechanism behind it. Do you get a loan out? You obviously have to get a contractor, but you don't have any control if 5 blocks in your 5 sidewalk blocks need to get repaired, or they're cracked up, or they don't meet a certain spec. They just replace them, and it gets put on your property tax bill assessment. Can we see if there's best practices like that other cities do? And I believe that's on Mayfield Village.
Well, there's one,
I'm
Madam-
saying I'm willing to do that research and then maybe have a meeting with the administration to talk it through between now and when we have to finalize budget, because it's really important for walkability in the city and safety.
Agreed.
Go ahead, Mayor.
So I think that it is something that would certainly improve quality of life for people, especially those people who might have difficulty navigating, all of the things that we have to offer on foot or on wheels, on the sidewalks. And I know when we initially started having this conversation, at least from the administration's perspective or from my perspective, I thought that the gold standard might eventually be that the city takes on the responsibility in total for the refreshing, maintenance, repair, and reconstruction over time of our sidewalks. And that would require I think, for sustainable funding of that additional responsibility that the city organization would be taking on would be sort of a universal assessment on frontage in order to fund that program and provide for the additional capacity that would be required to initiate and manage those contracts. Obviously, the city could potentially do some of that work if we took that on wholesale. In an emergency and you really needed to get something done, the city could go out and pour some concrete potentially, but in all likelihood, most of it would be done on a contract basis. And with that citywide assessment, we could do a lot more planful work as opposed to responding to, okay, that block is broken and that resident now has a citation, which is fine. That's a fine method for a program as well. But in terms of proactive funding and capacity building so that we can be more planful and maybe set the city up into zones, I think we were talking about, and just rotate through the zones, doing updates to the sidewalks in a regular, gradual way so that every corner of the city is touched over a period of, 5-10 years. The whole city is refreshed, is rebuilt, repaired. So that we can lengthen the life of those things. Because, we've got people who are going down the sidewalk, they got to go down into the street and then back up to a sidewalk because they can't navigate some of these sidewalks. And so it's definitely a priority and it should be addressed. And I do hope that the city can move forward to a citywide responsibility for that so that we can be a little bit more proactive about it.
I may bring that up on my next committee meeting so that we can just start the conversation.
And that'll be fine. Also keep in mind how that will affect the forestry department because in many cases,
Yes,
the sidewalk has
Yes.
come up, it's a result of a tree, so we
Yeah.
have to go in and trim back the roots and stuff of the tree
Yeah.
before a new sidewalk.
could that be done on a contractual basis too, as needed possibly? To have someone that's an arborist come in and do that if they just cut the roots, or maybe the tree needs to go? Is that something, rather than having it to add staff for it? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think in Shaker, the way that they did it, they actually, the contractor that did the sidewalk may have contracted with someone to
Okay.
do the tree, but I don't really recall
Okay,
if they did it or if they had a contractor that did it. But I'm just saying it's a consideration.
oh yes, and that's one of the major, in my neighborhood, I've got a gap right now on one of my neighbor's sidewalks of a tree that was already, she's already fixed 2 panels and the tree switched from where it was, had its roots pruned and now it's, yeah, so anyway, I'm just letting you know, it's just a heads up.
I could get into a whole nother conversation about trees, which I wanted this time, but just the benefit of trees and why we don't like to just cut trees.
Absolutely understood. So, it would be determined if the tree was still healthy.
Right.
That's all I'm saying, that if it's not healthy, then there's a decision to be
Not
made.
healthy, there's a decision
Yeah.
to be made.
I also would like to have you think about if we're going to increase, and Councilor Paz should be interested in this, if we're going to increase our funds spent on repaving, resurfacing streets, any capacity that you would need to increase in your department to accommodate that increase in funding. I just want to put that out there because we still, as most of us on council, are looking at trying to get more money put into that budget to get streets fixed. So that will
We
directly.
already started looking at next year's program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'll say a lot of the work that we've done in terms of the staffing in Public Works and the sort of the management staffing in Public Works has been with an eye toward being able to better manage more of that kind of work and not keep everything on the director's shoulders.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that additional capacity at the management and executive level in the department will allow for more of that kind of contract
Yeah.
management initiation in our road program in particular, but also in other aspects of the work that they do, to the capital work that they do.
Thank you. I do not want to put more burden on Director Klinkskill, that's for certain.
Also, keep in mind, you guys will have on your agenda in next week's meeting where I request an addition in our road program because we added 2 streets to this year's program that were not initially part of the program.
Okay,
So there's some legislation that'll be forthcoming to increase the budget that I had initially requested, because I know I mentioned in a meeting that we were going to add Goodnor because the way the traffic was rerouted when we had the fire, it really did a number on that street. So then we also increased Marlindale because folks were using that street also. So those 2 streets were added to this year's program.
And one more, and this is sort of it's a capital expense, but it is not a capital project. It would be capital equipment that I would be suggesting for inclusion. I'm doing some research now to see what the options are for the inclusion of these pieces of equipment. I've discussed this before, but I just wanted to bring it up briefly. We did a different kind of road condition assessment this time around than we've done before. And it's not to disparage the method before, but sort of having a trained person take a look at the road conditions on all of the roads and sort of make determinations about where we are on each of the roads in order to have an objective view of the road conditions and base our priorities for road repair and road resurfacing on the condition of the roads is an important thing, that we can have equitable distribution of this funding and the improvements throughout the city. We did a little bit differently than just sort of eyeballing it. And we had a service come in and map the roads, map the condition of the roads, I believe with LiDAR, and feed that into a computer program that, judges in a much more almost microscopic way than somebody can with their naked eye, what the condition of each of these roads are. And my goal in pursuing that service was to test it out to see how it works for us before potentially investing in capital equipment of our own that we would mount on our refuse and recycling trucks that would map our streets using LiDAR, feed it into, probably AI at this point in order to determine what's going on in that street. And the LiDAR and the way that it works allows us to see problems before we can see them with our eyes. So we can see cracking that may be occurring that we might not see with the naked eye, that we can then flag as something to go back, do some crack sealing over there on a spot basis, because we know that over there we're seeing the precursors of what will eventually become the pothole. Those cracks generally tend to start on the bottom of the asphalt as opposed to on the surface. And so having that constantly cycling through our community on our refuse and recycling trucks and feeding data into that program will give us up-to-date, less reliance on somebody having to report that their tire was damaged by a pothole, because we can get to it a little bit more proactively. I'm hoping that council considers that possibility as well when talking about funding, so that we can be a little bit more proactive and protect the roads that we have repaved in a better way, because the work to maintain them, the crack sealing, those sorts of things can help lengthen the life of the road that we've just repaved and protect that investment.
and also looking at how complete and green streets can be applied.
And I'm glad the mayor brought that up about the pavement rating, because it's like a rumor out in the neighborhood that we don't rate our streets. We rate we've rated all of our roads in the street, and that's how we determine what our road program is going to be. And so we have some streets in the city that may be rated poorly that we bypass because there's other work that has to be done, like a water main needs to be replaced. So we don't want to put a new road in where we know we've had a lot of water main breaks. So now we're pursuing funding through the Cleveland Water Department's suburban water main replacement program. So although that street may rate poorly, if we bypass it, it's because we're pursuing funding to get the water main repaired, like we've done in some other areas. So I know that's come up, and I just,
Whatever we can do to fight against those rumors, I'd really appreciate if you let us know, okay?
So, I mean, I think there's been some, I think there's a need to communicate some of that out to the residents. I mean, how you do come up with the road program. Because we all do know, and we've talked about publicly over and over and again, that the roads are rated not only by us, you know, some of these are rated by the county and other things. And there's some best practices that go out, and apparently you're bringing another best practice to us, which is a great idea. But I do think we need to really look seriously at this when it comes to budget time. I mean, you know, maybe find a ways to get more crews out there to do more crack filling. I mean, things that we know that we can be a little bit more proactive on. I know you've been down resources, but anything that we can do to make sure that you're fully staffed so they can be doing these things. I mean, there's a ton of questions I'd love to ask, like painting fire hydrants. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I'd like to go over today. And I know you have the budget item and sort of out of time. But I do think we need to have much more conversation, budget. What can we assist with from a legislative perspective? So you and whoever's the mayor next year over get some of this.
and because of the LiDAR technology that we use, we did implement a best practice, and we did incorporate into our road program to go back and do crack sealing on those streets that we did last year.
That's great.
And that was something that I wanted to just briefly address as well, the crack sealing program. I know that there is a rumor out there, and maybe we get some clarity about sort of what our crack sealing has been historically versus what we're doing now. I know that some of that crack sealing work was brought in-house and not made a piece, so like in an ad hoc sort of spot way at some point. I'm not exactly sure when that occurred in terms of not having it as a part of our contracted road program and bringing it back into that contracted road program. But I do think that it's important to keep those maintenance
Yes.
processes in that program so that we can lengthen the life of the roads. I mean, that's what we want. I will say this too. I don't think people really recognize the massive widespread impact that our climate crisis is having. I know that it's incredibly poor timing for me, but the freeze-thaw cycle that we had over the winter, this last winter, was shocking. And the amount of damage that it did to our roads, because our roads are, that process of paving our roads is built on a climate that doesn't exist anymore here.
Mhm.
Things have changed. And we have not been able to adapt to it as quickly as the climate has been changing. And so those weather patterns do have an impact. I think that more, people than just here in Cleveland Heights will be looking at how to address those things, how to manage, how we deal with, maybe we need new asphalt technology, and they're working on that.
There you go.
But in the interim, being more diligent and proactive about assessing, diagnosing, and preventing will go pretty far in terms of hopefully mitigating future issues that stem from the same climate and freeze-thaw cycle problems that we had in the last season.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to improving or seeing innovative technology to deal with the climate crisis and the things that we're confronting as a municipality and also nationally that nobody knew was coming. Dams, for instance. I won't even go there. Do you have anything else this afternoon, morning? Thank you so much for coming and joining us this morning in our committee meeting. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn at 11:05. Thank you.